Get ready for the unknown. If you love feeling the chill down your spine and venturing into stories that will take your sleep away, subscribe to our channel now and activate the bell. Don't miss the next horror tales that will take you to the darkest corners of your mind. Are you ready to face your fears? Portal is open. Enter. That spring morning in 1972 seemed ordinary for the Turner family. Anne, the mother, and her two children, Julie and Matt, decided to visit an antiques auction in a small town in Florida. Amidst the old furniture and dusty paintings, Julie was enchanted by a porcelain doll. She had bright blue eyes, rosy cheeks, and an antique lace dress. "She looks so delicate," commented Anne, smiling at her daughter. When the auctioneer announced the sale, Anne placed a bid, and within minutes, the doll belonged to the family. At first, the doll was just another addition to Julie's bedroom shelf. But soon Anne began to notice things out of place. One morning, when she entered her daughter's room, she noticed that the doll was lying on the bed, even though Julie had left it sitting on the shelf the night before. "You probably knocked it over in your sleep," said Anne, trying to ignore the discomfort that was growing inside her. A few days later, Matt started complaining that his toys were disappearing and reappearing in places he swore he hadn't left them. "Someone's playing with me," he said angrily. Anne began to worry, but still didn't connect the events to the doll. Then, one night, Julie woke up screaming. "She's looking at me!" she cried, pointing to the doll sitting in the corner of the room. Frightened, Anne ran to her daughter's room. The doll was exactly as it had been left, but Julie's eyes reflected genuine fear. "She moved, Mommy. I swear." Anne tried to calm her daughter down, but the feeling that something was wrong began to creep into her thoughts. She didn't know that this was just the beginning of something much darker. The following nights were tense. Anne would wake up in the middle of the night with the feeling that she was being watched, even though no one was around. The house was filled with a strange energy, an oppressive silence that made even the smallest noises echo in a disconcerting way. One day, as she passed through the hallway, she noticed small scratches on Julie's bedroom door, as if something sharp had been dragged there. Maybe the children are playing, she thought, but something told her it wasn't that simple. That same night, Anne heard whispers coming from Julie's room. When she opened the door, she found her daughter curled up in the corner of the bed, her eyes fixed on the doll. "She's talking to me," said Julie, her voice trembling. Anne tried to ignore the chill that ran down her spine, taking the doll to another room in the hope of calming her daughter. But the feeling of dread remained. The scratches increased, also appearing on the walls and floor. Something, or someone, seemed to be trying to get out. David, Anne's husband, had always been skeptical about the supernatural. "It's just paranoia," he used to say, trying to reassure her. However, the next morning, even he was forced to reconsider. On the floor of the hallway near Matt's room, there were much deeper scratch marks. "That wasn't done by a child," he whispered to Anne. She agreed silently, feeling her terror grow. It was then that they made a desperate decision. They would lock the doll in the basement, that away from the children and any interaction. They thought that this would finally give them peace. But as night fell, the feeling that something was watching them didn't go away. On the contrary, it seemed stronger, more present. Anne woke up at dawn to a distant noise, the sound of something scratching the walls again. And this time, it seemed to be coming from under her feet. Determined to find out what was going on, David decided to install a security camera in the basement. "Let's put an end to this once and for all," he said, trying to hide his growing unease. The camera was positioned so that the doll was always in view. That night, everyone tried to sleep, but the oppressive silence in the house made everyone uncomfortable. Anne, anxious, woke up several times, but everything seemed calm, too much so. The next morning, David checked the camera recordings. As he watched, his face turned pale. "Anne, you need to see this." In the video, the doll, which should have been still, moved slowly. First, it tilted its head to the side as if it was listening to something. Then it crawled forward a few centimeters. All the while, her eyes were fixed on the camera, as if she knew she was being watched. "This can't be real," said Anne, horrified. David, normally skeptical, had no explanation. "Let's get rid of this thing." However, When they went down to the basement to get the doll, it was no longer there. The trunk they had locked it in was open, and the doll had disappeared. The scratch marks on the floor indicated that something or someone had dragged the doll away. When they searched the house, they found the doll sitting in the living room, perfectly positioned on the sofa, as if it was waiting for them. David tried to throw it away, but every time they tried to get rid of it, the doll reappeared somewhere in the house. The terror grew. Something far beyond human comprehension was at work, and the family began to realize that whatever was connected to the doll didn't want to be simply discarded. Desperate, Anne and David decided to seek help. A specialist in paranormal objects was called in to examine the doll. When the man entered the house, his expression changed immediately. "This object is linked to something ancient and evil," he said. "She's not just a doll. There's an entity trapped in her, something that's trying to get out, and it's using the doll as a conduit." The expert explained that the doll had belonged to a girl in the 19th century who mysteriously disappeared. It was said that the child's spirit was attached to the doll, but the truth was much darker. The spirit attached to the doll was not that of a child, but of something much worse. The girl had been sacrificed in a macabre ritual, and the spirit that had taken over the doll was that of a demon, constantly looking for a new victim to escape its prison. "You brought it home unknowingly, and now it's connected to your family." The specialist tried to perform a banishing ritual, but the house reacted violently. Lights flashed, objects flew, and the doll seemed to smile with each failed attempt at exorcism. "We can't just send her away," said the specialist, pale. "She wants something or someone." The fear was growing. Julie, the child who had been enchanted by the doll at first, was becoming quieter and quieter, almost as if she was hearing something that the others couldn't perceive. Then, one night, Julie disappeared. Panic gripped the house. Scratch marks led down to the basement, and the oppressive silence indicated that the worst was yet to come. When they went down to the basement, the scene was terrifying. In the center of the room, surrounded by candles that no one had lit, was Julie, lying on the floor with her doll beside her. Her eyes were open, but there was no life in them. Anne ran to her daughter, shouting her name, while David tried to stay calm. "She's here," whispered Julie in a voice that wasn't her own. "She wants to come out." The expert, in desperation, explained that the only way to break the curse would be to destroy the doll. However, this also meant risking the life of Julie, who was now connected to the entity. If it's destroyed, the link could be severed, or it could take your daughter with it. It was an impossible choice, but Anne knew she had no other option. David picked up the doll with trembling hands and threw it to the ground, breaking it in half with an axe. The instant the porcelain shattered, a horrible scream echoed through the basement, and the candles went out instantly. Julie's body began to struggle, but after a few seconds, everything stopped. Silence fell over the house. Julie slowly opened her eyes, and the entity finally disappeared. However, while the family was trying to recover from the trauma, something strange happened. Anne, while cleaning up the shards of the doll, noticed a small piece of porcelain in the corner of the room. Before she could react, the shard glowed slightly. She looked at her reflection in the broken glass and saw something: the doll's smile. After the incident in the basement, the Turner family's life tried to return to normal, but the shadows of the past still hung over them. Julie, who had always been a cheerful and energetic child, was now withdrawn. Her eyes, which had once sparkled with curiosity, seemed constantly lost in dark thoughts. Although the entity had been destroyed, something was still wrong. There was a silent distance between Julie and the world, as if she were trapped somewhere that no one else could reach. Anne watched her daughter with growing concern. Julie hardly spoke anymore about what had happened, and any mention of the doll left her in a state of palpable anxiety. "It's all right, Mommy," she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But at night, the screams came again. Julie would wake up in tears, sweating, saying that she was still watching her. Anne, unable to cope with the idea that her daughter might be irreparably traumatized, began to lose sleep. The doll's scars were deep and invisible. The first signs that something was terribly wrong appeared in the following weeks. Julie began to avoid mirrors and any surface that reflected her image. When Anne tried to help her do her hair in front of the bathroom mirror, Julie screamed and knocked the object to the floor, breaking it into 1,000 pieces. "She's in the reflection," Julie screamed, her eyes wide with terror. Anne, frightened, tried to console her, but the girl's conviction that something was still there was unshakable. David, always skeptical, believed it was just a passing trauma. "She'll get over it in time, Anne," he said, trying to remain calm, but inside he also felt that something dark was still hanging over them. The absence of answers only increased Anne's fear. She knew that what had happened to Julie was more than a nightmare. Something had changed inside her daughter, and Anne feared that the doll's spirit had never really left. The days passed, but the feeling that something was wrong intensified. Julie began to develop strange behaviors. She whispered to herself, as if talking to someone no one else could see. Anne sometimes caught her talking quietly in a corner of the room, her eyes glazed over as if she were in a trance. When she asked what she was doing, Julie would simply reply, "She's still here, Mom. She never left." The scratches also returned. One night, Anne woke up to a familiar noise, that sound of something sharp scraping against the walls. When she turned on the light, she saw small scratches on her bedroom door, identical to the ones that had appeared when the doll was at home. She ran to Julie's room, but found her daughter fast asleep. However, when she looked at the girl's fingernails, she noticed something that made her freeze with fear. They were smeared with paint from the wall, as if Julie had made the scratches herself. The invisible presence that plagued the house seemed to grow stronger every day. Lights flickered for no reason, doors closed on their own, and an intense chill took over the rooms at night. Julie began to draw incessantly, filling pages and pages with disturbing images. Distorted faces, gigantic shadows, and the doll. Always the doll. Anne, desperate, tried to take her to psychologists, but the doctors couldn't explain what was happening. "It's just post-traumatic trauma," they said. "She just needs time." But Julie knew that the problem wasn't just in her mind. "She doesn't want to leave me, Mom. She needs me," she whispered on one of the few occasions she spoke about her feelings. Anne, feeling that she was losing her daughter to something far beyond her control, realized that the impact of the doll's possession was deeper than any specialist could understand. As the months passed, Julie's mental health worsened. She began to spend more time alone, locked in her room, refusing to eat and interacting minimally with her family. Anne began to fear the worst, that her daughter was slowly being pulled towards the same fate as the doll. One night, while checking on Julie as she slept, Anne saw something that made her question her own sanity. A faint glow around her daughter's bed, almost imperceptible but real. The glow disappeared quickly, but the feeling that something supernatural still inhabited the room intensified. Anne decided to investigate on her own, revisiting the notes of the paranormal expert who had helped them get rid of the doll. Among the old papers, she found a letter he had written, which had never been sent. It contained details of the doll's origin and a grim warning. Even if the doll is destroyed, the link between the object and the victim may persist. The spirit can choose a new host if it has become deeply connected. It was then that Anne understood the terrible truth. The spirit had not been destroyed, but transferred. The doll wasn't the real problem, it was just a conduit. The real danger now lay within Julie. Desperate, Anne sought out the specialist again, only to discover that he had mysteriously died a few weeks after the ritual. With no one to turn to, Anne realized that she was alone in her fight against the evil that possessed her daughter. One morning, Julie disappeared. Anne woke up to her daughter's room empty, her bed made up as if she had never slept there. Anne's heart pounded uncontrollably, and an overwhelming panic overwhelmed her. She shouted for David, who immediately began searching the house. There was no sign of Julie. The only thing out of place was a new drawing left in the center of the bed. A figure of a girl holding hands with her porcelain doll, both smiling disturbingly. They searched the entire house, and then suddenly they heard the basement door creak. They rushed down, and there, in the darkest corner, they found Julie, standing with her back to them, murmuring something incomprehensible. "Julie," Anne shouted, trying not to let panic take over. Her daughter turned slowly with a smile that didn't seem like hers. "She's almost ready, Mommy," she whispered. "She wants me to go with her." Anne tried to move closer, but something stopped her from taking another step. A supernatural coldness filled the basement, and Julie's eyes looked empty, as if she wasn't fully there anymore. David ran to his daughter, trying to hug her, but was pushed back by an invisible force. "She needs me," Julie repeated, her voice sounding distant, like an echo, as if she was slipping further away from the child Anne once knew. It was then that Anne realized if she didn't act immediately, she would lose Julie forever. The spirit of the doll somehow was still active. It was about to claim its final victim. Desperate, Anne understood that the only way to save Julie was to sever the connection once and for all, even if it cost her everything. She remembered the specialist's words, "The spirit may choose a new host." With a heavy heart and tears in her eyes, Anne made the hardest decision of her life. She took a piece of the broken mirror she had kept as a reminder of the doll and looked into her daughter's reflection. "If it's a soul you want," she whispered, "then take mine." Julie's reflection in the mirror distorted, and the oppressive presence in the basement seemed to waver for a moment. Julie collapsed to the floor, unconscious, while Anne felt a crushing pressure in her chest, as if something was being torn from her. The spirit hesitated for a moment, then, like a distant whisper, disappeared. Julie opened her eyes, confused, but the darkness that had hovered over her was gone. Anne, however, knew that something inside her had changed forever. She looked at the mirror one last time, and there, in the reflection, she saw a dark smile that wasn't hers. The curse now followed her. Julie was saved, but the price had been paid.